A lonely widow saved a stray kitten, never knowing it would one day rescue her right back. The thought repeated in Eleanor Mitchell's mind as she stared at the framed photo of her late husband, Robert, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, his smile still able to make her heart ache 3 years after his passing. Outside her window, autumn rain pelted against the glass, matching the steady drip of tears she could no longer hold back. The modest, 2-bedroom cottage that had once been filled with laughter and shared dreams now echoed with silence. At 63, Eleanor felt every creak in the floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, reminders that life continued its march forward while she remained frozen in grief. Her morning routine never varied: coffee at 6:30, toast with a scrape of marmalade, the newspaper she barely read. Then the long, empty hours stretched before her like a desolate road. Her daughter, Claire, called from Seattle every Sunday, her voice bright but hurried, always promising to visit soon. That soon had stretched into months, then years. "You need to get out more, Mom," Claire would say, concern threading through her voice. "Join a club. Meet people." But Eleanor's responses were always the same practiced excuses: the weather, her arthritis, the comfort of familiar surroundings. The truth was far simpler and more painful. She didn't know how to be alone in the world, yet couldn't bear the thought of starting over. That rainy October evening, as the wind howled through the eaves of her cottage, Eleanor wrapped herself in Robert's old cardigan, the blue one that still somehow held the faintest trace of his sandalwood aftershave, and settled into her rocking chair by the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across the living room, illuminating the collection of photographs that chronicled a life once shared: their wedding day, Claire's graduation, the trip to Yellowstone for their 30th anniversary. It was just as she was about to close her eyes, lulled by the warmth of the fire and memories, that she heard it, a sound so faint she nearly dismissed it as the wind. A high-pitched mewling that cut through the patter of rain. Eleanor froze, her hand clutching the worn fabric of Robert's cardigan. There it was again, unmistakable this time. With joints protesting, she rose from her chair and moved to the kitchen door that led to the small covered porch at the back of the house. The security light flickered on as she cracked open the door, revealing nothing but rain-slicked steps and the shadowy outline of her neglected garden. "Hello?" she called softly, feeling foolish. The wind answered with a gust that sent dead leaves skittering across the porch. She was about to close the door when she saw it, a tiny movement in the corner where her gardening boots stood abandoned since spring. A small, bedraggled creature, no bigger than her hand, huddled against the wall, its fur plastered to its trembling body. Eleanor's breath caught. The kitten, for that's what it was, looked up at her with wide, golden eyes that seemed to hold all the fear and hope in the world. "Oh," she whispered, her heart constricting. "Oh, you poor little thing." Without thinking, she stepped out into the cold air, her slippered feet growing damp on the wet boards. The kitten shrunk back, a pathetic hiss escaping its tiny mouth. "It's all right," Eleanor murmured, kneeling despite the protest in her knees. "I won't hurt you." She extended her hand slowly, palm up, the way Robert had taught Claire to approach stray cats when she was young. The memory surfaced unbidden, Robert's gentle voice: "Let them come to you, honey. Trust is earned, not demanded." The kitten's nose twitched, whiskers quivering as it assessed the potential threat. Then, with what seemed like monumental effort for such a tiny being, it took one tentative step forward. Eleanor remained perfectly still, ignoring the rain now soaking through her cardigan, the chills seeping into her bones. Another step, and another, until finally, with a soft mewl that broke something open inside her chest, the kitten pressed its cold, wet nose against her fingertips. "There now," she whispered, her voice thick. "There now." With movements slow and deliberate, she scooped the kitten into her hands, feeling its rapid heartbeat against her palm. It was pitifully thin beneath the matted fur, ribs prominent, eyes too large for its triangular face. Back inside, Eleanor's kitchen, which had felt cavernous in its emptiness for so long, suddenly seemed alive with purpose. She wrapped the kitten in a soft dish towel, rubbing gently to dry its sodden fur. It was a scrawny little thing, mottled gray with white paws and a splash of white across its face like a half-finished thought. "You need a name," she said, surprised by the sound of her own voice filling the kitchen. The kitten blinked slowly, too exhausted to protest as she examined it. "A girl?" she determined after a moment. "Well then, little miss, what shall we call you?" The kitten sneezed, a tiny explosion that shook its entire body. Despite herself, Eleanor smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. "Bless you," she said automatically, and then it came to her. "Blessing," she said softly. "That's what I'll call you, because you appeared just when I needed something to care for." That night, for the first time since Robert's death, Eleanor's bed didn't feel quite so empty. Blessing curled into the crook of her arm, her tiny body radiating surprising warmth, her gentle purr a soothing vibration against Eleanor's chest. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor wondered fleetingly if she had saved the kitten, or if perhaps it was the other way around. Morning arrived with tentative sunlight filtering through the curtains Eleanor had forgotten to close. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place the weight on her chest, the unfamiliar warmth. Then Blessing stretched, tiny, needle-like claws extending into the quilt, and the events of the previous night rushed back. "Good morning to you too," Eleanor murmured, her voice rough with sleep. The kitten regarded her with those golden eyes, now clearer in the daylight, before delicately stepping across Eleanor's body to perch on the edge of the bed. Her fur, dried overnight, was fluffier than it had appeared, though still matted in places. "I suppose we should see about getting you some proper food," Eleanor said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The arthritis in her knees seemed less insistent this morning, or perhaps she was simply distracted by her new responsibility. In the harsh light of day, Blessing looked even more pitiful, one ear slightly torn, a small bald patch on her hindquarters, her frame so thin that Eleanor could count every vertebra along her spine. Yet there was a dignity in the way the kitten held herself, washing her face with a paw while keeping a wary eye on her surroundings. Eleanor's pantry yielded little suitable for a cat. She had long since stopped bothering with proper grocery shopping, subsisting on toast, soup, and the occasional casserole brought by well-meaning neighbors. But in the back of the refrigerator, she found a carton of milk and a tin of tuna that would have to do. "We'll get you the proper things today," she promised, watching with a mixture of amusement and concern as Blessing attacked the small saucer of tuna with ferocious hunger. The prospect of leaving the house, something that had seemed like an insurmountable task for months, now felt like a necessary adventure. Eleanor found herself planning the expedition as she showered and dressed in something other than her usual house dress, actual slacks, a sweater in a deep plum that Claire had given her last Christmas, still with the tags attached, and even a touch of lipstick. "I should take you to the vet," she told Blessing, who had followed her from room to room, occasionally stopping to investigate corners with her nose. But first, supplies. The drive to the pet store in the next town over was the farthest Eleanor had ventured alone in nearly a year. She gripped the steering wheel of her seldom-used Buick with white knuckles, hyper-aware of every other vehicle, every traffic light. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of Pet World, her shoulders ached with tension. For Blessing, she reminded herself, taking a deep breath before pushing open the car door. The store was overwhelming. Bright lights, colorful displays, the cacophony of barking dogs from the grooming section at the back. Eleanor stood just inside the entrance, her purse clutched to her chest, fighting the urge to retreat. "First-time pet owner?" The voice belonged to a young woman with a nose ring and vivid blue streaks in her dark hair. Her name tag read Zoe, and her smile was kind, free of the pitying look Eleanor had grown accustomed to from the few people she still interacted with. "Is it that obvious?" Eleanor managed. Zoe laughed, a bright sound that somehow put Eleanor at ease. "You have that deer-in-headlights look we see a lot. Plus no pet with you, but you're eyeing the cat section." "New kitty?" "Yes." Eleanor found herself explaining about finding Blessing in the rain. "She's very small, probably not more than a few months old." "Sounds like she found the right porch to hide under," Zoe said, leading Eleanor through the aisles. "Let's get her set up properly." What Eleanor had envisioned as a quick trip for food and perhaps a toy or two turned into an hour-long education. Zoe helped her select kitten food, higher in protein for growing bodies, a proper litter box. This one has lower sides, easier for tiny legs. Toys. She needs stimulation, especially if she's going to be an indoor cat, and a soft bed, though she'll probably prefer your lap. By the time they reached the checkout, Eleanor's cart was full, and she found herself sharing stories about Robert's love for the stray cats that used to visit their garden. He built little shelters for them every winter, she told Zoe as she waited for her credit card to process. Insisted they had as much right to comfort as we did. He sounds like he was a wonderful man, Zoe said. The past tense hit Eleanor like a physical blow, as it always did. But for once, it wasn't accompanied by the crushing wave of grief that usually followed. Instead, there was a gentle ache, almost sweet in its familiarity. He was, she agreed softly. As Zoe helped her load the packages into her car, she handed Eleanor a business card. This is Dr. Chen's clinic. Tell them Zoe sent you. She's amazing with rescues. And here, she scribbled a number on the back. That's my cell. Send me a picture of your little blessing sometime. Or call if you have questions. Eleanor clutched the card, suddenly overcome. When was the last time someone had offered her their number, made a genuine connection? Thank you, she said, her voice thick. I will. The drive home felt lighter somehow, the autumn landscape brighter, more vivid. Eleanor found herself noticing things she had overlooked for years. The way the sunlight filtered through the golden leaves, the cheerful displays of pumpkins on front porches, a group of children laughing as they jumped in a pile of leaves. Blessing was waiting at the kitchen window when Eleanor pulled into the driveway, a tiny sentinel with her face pressed against the glass. For the first time in 3 years, Eleanor was greeted by another living being when she opened her door, and the simple joy of it brought tears to her eyes. Look what I've brought you, she said, carrying in bags as Blessing wound excitedly around her ankles. A proper welcome home. Home. The word settled in her chest with unexpected warmth. That evening, as she sat in her rocking chair with Blessing curled in her lap, playing with a feather toy that Eleanor dangled above her, the cottage felt different. Still filled with memories, yes, but no longer a mausoleum to what had been lost. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine what might still be gained. She reached for her phone and composed a text to Claire, something she rarely did, preferring to wait for her daughter's calls. Attached was a photo of Blessing, mid-pounce, her golden eyes bright with life. Meet the newest member of the family, she typed. Her name is Blessing. Claire's response came almost immediately. Oh my God, Mom! She's adorable! Where did you get her? She found me, Eleanor replied simply. Or perhaps we found each other? The veterinarian's office smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo, an oddly comforting combination that reminded Eleanor of taking family dogs for checkups decades ago. Blessing huddled in the carrier on her lap, occasionally emitting plaintive meows that tore at Eleanor's heart. It's going to be all right, she soothed, slipping a finger through the grate to stroke the kitten's soft head. Doctor, Chen will help you feel better. Doctor. Chen turned out to be a petite woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a practical bun and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested a lifetime of smiles. When she examined Blessing, her hands were gentle but confident, her voice a calm murmur of reassurance directed at both cat and owner. She's underweight and has some minor infections, but nothing we can't fix. Doctor, Chen announced, straightening up. I'd estimate she's about 4 months old. You did the right thing bringing her in so quickly. Relief flooded through Eleanor. So she'll be all right? With proper care, absolutely. Doctor? Chen's smile was warm. She's lucky you found her when you did. Another night in that rain? She let the sentence hang. Zoe at the pet store recommended you, Eleanor said as Dr. Chen prepared vaccinations. She was very helpful. Ah, Zoe. Doctor? Chen's eyes crinkled. She sends me all the special cases. Works at the shelter on weekends, too. Heart as big as the ocean, that girl. As she administered the shots, Dr. Chen chatted easily about care instructions, the importance of scheduled feedings for underweight kittens, and the signs of improvement Eleanor should look for. Blessing, surprisingly, remained calm under the doctor's experienced touch. She trusts you already, Doctor, Chen observed. Cats are excellent judges of character, you know. Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at this simple validation. Now, Doctor, Chen said, making notes in a file, have you considered having her microchipped? It's a simple procedure, and if she ever gets lost... Yes, Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. Yes, absolutely. As they were preparing to leave, Eleanor settled the bill and made a follow-up appointment for the next month. Dr. Chen handed her a small paper bag containing medication and supplements. You're doing a wonderful thing, she said, her hand briefly touching Eleanor's. Rescue goes both ways, I've always found. Outside, buckling the carrier into the passenger seat of her car, Eleanor considered those words. Rescue goes both ways. Was that true? Had taking in Blessing somehow rescued her as well? From what? Loneliness? Grief? The slow withering of purpose? She glanced at the carrier where Blessing had settled, apparently exhausted from the ordeal of examination and vaccination. "Let's go home," Eleanor said softly. "We both need rest." That night, after administering the first dose of antibiotics, a struggle that left Eleanor with a small scratch on her wrist and Blessing hiding under the sofa for an hour, they settled into what was becoming their evening routine. Eleanor with a book she was actually reading instead of staring blankly at the pages, Blessing alternating between energetic play with her new toys and collapse into sudden, profound sleep. When the phone rang, Eleanor was surprised to see Claire's name on the screen. Sunday calls were their tradition, but this was Wednesday. "Mom?" Claire's voice held an unusual urgency. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor shifted in her chair, confused. "Of course, dear. Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know." The cat picture, the texts. "It's not like you." And then Mrs. Abernathy next door called me because she saw you leaving the house 2 days in a row and wanted to make sure you weren't ill. The concern in her daughter's voice was genuine, but Eleanor felt a flicker of annoyance. Had she really become someone whose normal activities triggered worry? "I'm perfectly fine," she said, working to keep her tone light. "Better than fine, actually. Blessing needed supplies and a vet visit, that's all." "Blessing," Claire repeated. "You're really keeping her then?" "Of course I am." The idea of not keeping Blessing seemed absurd now, impossible to contemplate. "She needs me." There was a pause, and when Claire spoke again, her voice was softer. "That's good, Mom. I'm glad. It's been a while since you've sounded so alive," Eleanor supplied, surprising herself with the candor. Another pause. "Yes," Claire admitted. "Alive." After they hung up, Eleanor sat for a long time, stroking Blessing, who had climbed into her lap, purring thunderously. Alive. Was that how she sounded? Is that how she felt? She considered the past few days. The trips out of the house, the conversations with strangers, the simple physical tasks of caring for another being. The way her focus had shifted outward after years of turning inward. The ache in her muscles from bending to clean the litter box, the satisfaction of seeing Blessing eat with increasing appetite, the simple joy of being greeted at the door. Yes, she realized, this was what being alive felt like. She had forgotten. "Thank you," she whispered to the kitten in her lap. Blessing opened one eye, gave a slow blink that Eleanor had learned was a sign of feline affection, then returned to her nap, utterly secure in her place in the world. Days stretched into weeks, and Eleanor found herself falling into new routines centered around Blessing's needs and discoveries. The kitten grew stronger daily, her fur becoming glossy, her play more vigorous. She claimed favorite spots throughout the house: the sunny patch on the living room carpet in the mornings, the windowsill in the kitchen during afternoon birdwatching hours, and always, without fail, a place against Eleanor's side at night. November arrived with its shortened days and crisp air. Eleanor, who had dreaded the approach of winter for years, the isolation, the memories of holidays that would never be the same, found herself looking forward to cozy evenings by the fire with Blessing curled nearby. She began to venture out more frequently. Regular trips to the pet store where Zoe always greeted her by name, walks around the neighborhood with Blessing watching from the window, even a stop at the local coffee shop where she ordered something other than plain black coffee for the first time in years. "A pumpkin spice latte," she told the young barista, feeling slightly daring, "and one of those cranberry scones." Sitting at a small table by the window, savoring the sweet, spiced drink and flaky pastry, Eleanor found herself people-watching. Not with the detached envy of before, those people with their normal lives, their intact families, their reasons to smile, but with genuine interest. The mother juggling twins in a stroller, the elderly couple holding hands across their table, the college student with purple hair typing furiously on a laptop, all living their lives, each with joys and sorrows she couldn't begin to guess. She was so absorbed in these observations that she didn't notice the man approaching until he spoke. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Eleanor looked up, startled. He was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that had clearly been broken at some point. His smile was apologetic, his eyes kind. "Every other table is full," he explained, gesturing at the crowded cafe. "I wouldn't intrude, but—" "No, please," Eleanor found herself saying, indicating the empty chair across from her. "I'm just finishing anyway. I appreciate it." He set down his coffee and a newspaper. "I'm Frank, by the way." Frank Hadley. Eleanor Mitchell. She offered her name automatically, then felt a flutter of anxiety. When was the last time she'd introduced herself to a stranger? Made small talk? But Frank didn't seem to expect conversation. He opened his newspaper, sipped his coffee, content with the companionable silence. Eleanor found herself relaxing, taking another bite of her scone without the sudden urgency to leave she'd anticipated. After a few minutes, Frank looked up from his paper. "Crossword?" he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Daily ritual. Though this one has me stumped. 7 letters, unexpected good fortune. Any ideas?" Eleanor blinked, surprised to be consulted. "Blessing," she said after a moment's thought. "Or perhaps windfall." Frank counted the letters on his fingers. "Blessing fits perfectly. Thank you." He penciled it in, then glanced at her over his glasses. "Are you a crossword person too?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "But I've been thinking about that word a lot lately. Blessing." Something in her tone must have invited further inquiry, because Frank folded his paper and gave her his full attention. "Oh?" Before she quite knew what was happening, Eleanor found herself telling this stranger about Blessing, the rainy night, the tiny mewling sound, the transformation of her empty house into a home again. Frank listened with genuine interest, asking questions about Blessing's personality, laughing at Eleanor's description of the kitten's antics. "I had a cat like that once," he said when she paused. "A troublemaker named Jasper. Lived to be 19, ruling the house with an iron paw the whole time." 19? That's wonderful. Eleanor felt a surge of hope at the thought of so many years with Blessing. "He was with me through a lot," Frank said, his expression softening with memory. "The end of my marriage, a career change, a move across the country, constant companion." "I'm sorry about your marriage," Eleanor said, then immediately worried it was too personal a comment, but Frank waved it away. "Ancient history. 20 years now. Amicable enough divorce, but still." The house was quiet afterward. "Jasper helped with that?" Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. "The silence is the hardest part, isn't it?" Their eyes met in a moment of perfect comprehension. Two people who knew exactly what the other meant. Then Frank glanced at his watch and straightened. "I've taken up too much of your time," he said, folding his newspaper. "Thank you for the crossword help and the company." "It was nice," Eleanor said, surprised to find she meant it. "The company, I mean." Frank hesitated, then reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "I'm here most mornings around this time. If you ever want to tackle a crossword together." He let the invitation hang, undemanding. Eleanor took the card, noting the simple text, "Frank Hadley, bookbinder and restoration specialist. You fix books?" she asked, intrigued despite herself. "I give them new life," he corrected with a smile. "The ones that seem beyond saving?" With a small wave, he was gone, leaving Eleanor staring at the card in her hand. A simple interaction, nothing more. Yet she felt oddly buoyant as she gathered her things and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. At home, Blessing greeted her with enthusiastic figure eights around her ankles, as if Eleanor had been gone for days rather than hours. As she prepared their lunch, tuna salad for herself, premium kitten food for Blessing, Eleanor found herself recounting her coffee shop encounter aloud. "He fixes books, can you imagine? What a lovely profession, giving new life to things others might discard." Blessing looked up from her food bowl, whiskers twitching as if in agreement. The next morning, Eleanor found herself considering a return to the coffee shop. She dismissed the idea immediately. It would seem too eager, too deliberate, then reconsidered. What was wrong with enjoying a good cup of coffee? If she happened to see Frank again, fine. If not, the scones were worth the trip anyway. Blessing watched from her perch on the windowsill as Eleanor applied lipstick and a touch of blush, something she hadn't bothered with for everyday outings in years. "Don't look at me like that," Eleanor told the kitten. "A woman my age should make an effort." Blessing's slow blink could have been interpreted as approval or judgment. Eleanor chose to believe the former. The coffee shop was less crowded than the previous day. Eleanor ordered her latte and scone, then hesitated, scanning the room. No sign of Frank. Relief and disappointment mingled as she chose a table, the same one as yesterday, she realized too late. She was halfway through her scone, idly watching people pass by the window, when a familiar voice broke into her thoughts. "Eleanor? I hoped I might see you again." Frank stood beside her table, coffee in hand, his smile warm but slightly uncertain. Today he wore a deep green sweater that brought out flecks of the same color in his hazel eyes. "I had a craving for another of these scones," Eleanor said, gesturing to her plate in what she hoped was a casual manner. "Please join me." As he settled across from her, producing his folded newspaper, Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves followed by a strange sense of rightness. This was how people connected, wasn't it? Small steps, shared moments, the gradual discovery of common ground. Today's puzzle theme is new beginnings, Frank said, opening the paper to the crossword. Seemed appropriate somehow. Eleanor smiled, reaching for her latte to hide the sudden emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. New beginnings indeed. The calendar moved toward December, and Eleanor's world expanded in ways both subtle and profound. Her morning coffee with Frank became a comfortable ritual, their conversations flowing more easily with each meeting. She learned that he was 67, a widower of 15 years with 2 grown sons who lived on the West Coast. His bookbinding studio was in the converted garage of his home a few blocks from the coffee shop. "You should visit sometime," he suggested one morning. "See the workshop. I'm restoring a first edition of Little Women that might interest you." Eleanor had mentioned her love of classic literature during one of their conversations, surprised and pleased when Frank not only shared her appreciation for Austen and the Brontes, but could discuss the merits of different translations of Tolstoy. "I'd like that," she said, then added quickly, "perhaps after the holidays." The approaching Christmas season still filled her with a mixture of dread and sadness. The first Christmas after Robert's death, Claire had insisted she fly to Seattle, a well-intentioned but ultimately painful exercise in pretending to enjoy festivities she couldn't feel. The second year, she'd declined the invitation, spending the day alone with the television for company, ignoring the phone's persistent ringing. Last year, Claire had compromised by sending an enormous gift basket and calling for a brief, strained conversation. This year, Eleanor wasn't sure what to expect, from Claire or from herself. At home, Blessing continued to thrive. No longer the scrawny, frightened kitten from the porch, she had blossomed into a sleek young cat with boundless energy and a distinctive personality. She greeted Eleanor at the door each day with vocal demands for attention, supervised all household activities from strategic vantage points, and had developed an uncanny ability to sense Eleanor's moods, offering purring comfort on difficult days. Dr. Chen, during their follow-up visit, had pronounced Blessing a perfect picture of health and complimented Eleanor on her care. "Some creatures just need the right person," the vet had said, scratching Blessing under the chin. "You two were meant to find each other." The words echoed in Eleanor's mind as she decorated the cottage for Christmas, something she hadn't bothered with since Robert's death. Nothing elaborate, a small tree in the corner of the living room, a wreath on the door, a few candles in the windows. But as she hung the delicate glass ornaments that she and Robert had collected over their 40 years together, she found the memories brought more comfort than pain. Blessing, of course, found the tree irresistible. After the third time catching her halfway up the trunk, ornaments swaying precariously, Eleanor installed a deterrent spray recommended by Zoe. "The struggle is real." Zoe had laughed when Eleanor described Blessing's determination. "Christmas trees are like catnip to kittens. Shiny things, hiding spots, something to climb, it's paradise." Now, as Eleanor placed the last ornament, a hand-blown glass star that Robert had given her on their first Christmas together, Blessing watched from a safe distance, tail twitching with barely contained curiosity. "You can look but not touch," Eleanor told her firmly. "Some traditions need to be preserved." Her phone chimed with an incoming text. Claire. "Mom, good news. We're coming for Christmas!" Mark found cheap flights. "We'll arrive on the 23rd, stay through the 26th. Scott's so excited to see his grandma. That okay?" Eleanor sat heavily on the sofa, her heart racing. Claire, her husband Mark, and 7-year-old Scott, here in the cottage for Christmas. After 3 years of distance and awkward phone calls, the prospect was both wonderful and terrifying. "Absolutely wonderful," she typed back after a moment. "Can't wait to see you all." Then, after a pause, "Blessing will be excited to meet her new family, too." Claire's response came quickly. "Scott's already planning what toys to bring for her. He's cat crazy lately." Eleanor smiled, imagining her grandson with Blessing. The image felt right, natural, the continuation of something, rather than just an echoing reminder of what had been lost. That evening, she called Frank to cancel their coffee the following morning. "I need to prepare for Claire's visit," she explained. "Shopping, cleaning. It's been years since I've had a proper family Christmas." "Of course," Frank said, his voice warm with understanding. "Family comes first. But perhaps—" He hesitated, then continued with careful casualness. "Perhaps I could help? I'm quite good at reaching high shelves, and I've been told my gift wrapping skills are above average. Eleanor found herself accepting his offer before she'd fully processed it. That would be lovely. But I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition if I'm volunteering, Frank said firmly. Besides, I'd like to meet this famous blessing I've heard so much about. And so it was arranged. Frank would come over the following afternoon to help Eleanor prepare for her family's visit. After they hung up, she stood in the middle of her living room, looking around with fresh eyes. What would Frank think of her home? The furniture was good quality but showing its age, the walls in need of fresh paint, the carpet worn in places from years of foot traffic. Yet, as her gaze traveled around the room, Robert's books still filling the shelves, the quilt Claire had made in high school draped over the sofa, Blessing curled in the rocking chair that had belonged to Eleanor's grandmother, she saw not shabbiness, but history, a life lived, memories preserved. Still, she spent the morning in a flurry of cleaning, putting fresh linens on the guest bed, organizing the refrigerator to make room for holiday groceries, even polishing the silver serving dishes that had remained untouched in the sideboard for years. When the doorbell rang promptly at 2 o'clock, Eleanor smoothed her hair, straightened her sweater, and took a deep breath before opening the door. Frank stood on the porch holding a small potted poinsettia and wearing a slightly nervous smile. "Housewarming gift?" he said, offering the plant. "Or Christmas gift, whichever you prefer." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Please come in." As she led him into the living room, she was acutely aware of his gaze taking in the details of her home. Blessing, who usually hid when strangers visited, surprised Eleanor by emerging from under the sofa and approaching Frank with cautious interest. "So this is the famous Blessing," Frank said, kneeling carefully to offer his hand for inspection. "Hello there, young lady." Blessing sniffed his fingers, then, to Eleanor's astonishment, bumped her head against his hand in clear invitation. "Well," Eleanor said, "she doesn't usually take to strangers so quickly." Frank looked up, still petting the now purring cat. "Perhaps I'm not a stranger anymore." The statement hung between them, simple yet profound in its implication. The afternoon passed in a blur of shared tasks. Frank helping Eleanor rearrange furniture to accommodate the air mattress for Scott, reaching the storage boxes on high shelves in the guest room closet, even fixing the loose banister on the stairs, a repair job Eleanor had been putting off for months. They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm that required minimal direction. Frank seemed to intuit what needed to be done, offering help without making Eleanor feel incompetent or needy. It was a delicate balance she hadn't experienced since Robert. As the winter daylight began to fade, they paused for tea in the kitchen. Blessing had appointed herself supervisor of their activities, following them from room to room with an air of feline authority. "She's quite the personality," Frank observed as Blessing leapt onto the kitchen counter, ignoring Eleanor's disapproving click of the tongue. "Definitely the queen of her domain." "She's brought so much life back into this house," Eleanor said, setting cups of tea on the table. "I didn't realize how quiet it had become until suddenly it wasn't anymore." Frank nodded, his expression thoughtful. "After Sarah, my wife, died, the silence was the hardest part. Even with my son still at home, there was this absence that seemed to echo through every room." "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "Exactly that." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the shared understanding deeper than words could express. "Does it get easier?" Eleanor asked finally, the question she'd never dared ask anyone else. "Not smaller, I know grief doesn't shrink, but does it get easier to carry?" Frank considered this, his hands wrapped around his teacup. "Yes," he said eventually, "but not in the way people tell you it will. It doesn't fade or diminish. It transforms, becomes something you can live alongside rather than something that consumes you." He met her eyes. "At least that was my experience." Eleanor nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. "That's happening, I think. Especially since Blessing. Animals have a way of anchoring us in the present," Frank said. "They don't allow us the luxury of dwelling too long in the past or worrying about the future. They need us now. They rescue us right back," Eleanor murmured, remembering Dr. Chen's words. Frank smiled, reaching across the table to briefly touch her hand. "Exactly so." The simple contact, warm, reassuring, human, sent a ripple of awareness through Eleanor. How long had it been since someone had touched her with such casual affection? The weekly hugs from Claire during her infrequent visits were dutiful rather than spontaneous. "Doctor, Wallace, her physician, was clinical and efficient. Even the rare embraces from old friends felt perfunctory, careful, as if grief had made her somehow fragile. But Frank's touch held no pity, no careful distance, just connection, one person to another. When he left that evening, promising to help with any last-minute preparations before Claire's arrival, Eleanor stood at the door watching until his car turned the corner. Blessing wound around her ankles, meowing insistently for her evening meal. "Yes, yes," Eleanor said, closing the door against the cold. "I know. Dinner time." But as she filled Blessing's bowl, she found herself humming, a Christmas carol she'd loved as a child, the melody coming back to her unbidden after years of silence. The days before Claire's arrival passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor baked cookies, Robert's favorite gingerbread and Scott's preferred chocolate chip, and prepared casseroles that could be easily reheated. She found herself texting Claire about meal preferences and Scott's Christmas list, the exchanges more frequent and natural than they had been in years. Frank stopped by several times, once to help hang outdoor lights along the porch railing. Nothing elaborate, just a festive touch, he'd insisted, and again to deliver a small, elegant wreath for the front door, handmade by a friend of his who worked with dried botanicals. "It's too much," Eleanor protested when he hung it on the nail above the knocker. "It's Christmas," Frank replied simply, "and your family is coming home. That deserves celebration. Home." The word echoed in Eleanor's mind as she made final preparations on the morning of December 23rd. Was this still Claire's home? She'd left for college at 18, returning for holidays and brief summer visits, but establishing her own life elsewhere. After Robert's death, her visits had become even more infrequent, as if the cottage without her father was a different place entirely. Yet as Eleanor placed fresh towels in the guest bathroom and arranged Scott's favorite stuffed dinosaur, kept safe in Eleanor's closet between visits, on the air mattress, she hoped the cottage might feel like home again, to all of them. Blessing, perhaps sensing Eleanor's nervous energy, stayed close throughout the morning, occasionally batting at the ribbon as Eleanor wrapped last-minute gifts. "They'll love you," Eleanor assured the cat, who blinked slowly in response. "Well, Scott certainly will. Claire's more of a dog person, but she'll come around. And Mark is allergic to many things, but I don't think cats are on the list." The sound of tires on gravel brought Eleanor to the window. A rental car was pulling into the driveway, and even from a distance, she could see Scott's excited face pressed against the back window. "They're here," she whispered to Blessing, who had retreated to the safety of the sofa at the unfamiliar sound. "Our family is here." The reunion on the porch was a tangle of hugs and exclamations. Scott, taller than Eleanor remembered and missing his 2 front teeth, threw himself into her arms with unrestrained enthusiasm. Claire, her hair shorter and styled differently than in the photos she shared online, held her mother a beat longer than usual, whispering, "You look wonderful, Mom." Mark, ever the peacemaker in family gatherings, handled the luggage and complimented the Christmas lights as they moved inside. "Grandma, where's Blessing?" Scott demanded immediately upon entering the living room. "Is she soft? Will she play with me? Does she like tuna? My friend Tyler has a cat named Muffin and she loves tuna." "Slow down, buddy," Mark laughed, setting down the suitcases. "Give Grandma a chance to answer one question at a time." Eleanor, her heart full to bursting at the sound of childish excitement filling the cottage again, pointed to the sofa where Blessing's wide golden eyes were visible, peering cautiously over the armrest. "There she is," Eleanor said, "but we should let her come to us. She's not used to so much excitement." Scott, demonstrating unexpected patience, sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet from the sofa. "Hi, Blessing," he said in a stage whisper that was barely quieter than his normal voice. "I'm Scott. I brought you a present from Seattle." Claire hung back, watching the scene with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. Was it surprise at her mother's new attachment? Pleasure at seeing Scott so engaged? Or something more complicated? "The house looks great, Mom," Claire said finally, her gaze traveling around the living room with its decorations and freshly arranged furniture. "Really festive. And is that a new rug?" "Just cleaned and repositioned," Eleanor said, pleased that Claire had noticed the changes. "Frank helped me move some of the heavier pieces." "Frank?" Claire's eyebrow raised slightly. "Who's Frank?" Before Eleanor could answer, Scott let out a delighted squeal. Blessing, evidently deciding the small human posed no threat, had emerged from her hiding place and was cautiously approaching his outstretched hand. "She likes me," Scott whispered, freezing in place as Blessing sniffed his fingers. Of course she does, Eleanor said, grateful for the distraction. She can tell you're a kind boy. The next hour was a flurry of settling in, bags carried upstairs, Scott's air mattress inflated and made up with dinosaur sheets, the kettle boiled for tea and hot chocolate. Through it all, Blessing retreated and reappeared, gradually growing more comfortable with the new voices and movement in her territory. It wasn't until that evening, after Scott had finally fallen asleep following the excitement of arrival and his first careful play session with Blessing, that Claire returned to her earlier question. So, she said, curling up on the sofa with a glass of wine, who's Frank? Eleanor busied herself arranging cookies on a plate, aware of Claire's curious gaze. A friend, she said finally. We met at the coffee shop in town. He's been very helpful with getting the house ready for Christmas. A friend, Claire repeated, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Mom, are you blushing? Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor said, though she could feel the warmth in her cheeks betraying her. Frank is a widower who does bookbinding and restoration. We enjoy each other's company. That's all? That's wonderful, Claire said, her tone softening. Really, Mom, I'm happy for you. Eleanor looked up, surprised by the genuine warmth in her daughter's voice. You are? Claire set down her wine glass and moved to the kitchen, leaning against the counter beside her mother. Of course I am. Do you know how worried I've been about you? All alone in this house, barely leaving except for groceries? When you started texting about Blessing, it was the first sign in 3 years that you were, I don't know, rejoining the world. I didn't realize I'd left it, Eleanor said quietly. Claire's expression was gentle but direct. Yes, you did. After Dad died, it was like you decided your life was over too. I understood, God, Mom, I was heartbroken too, but watching you just stop living, that was almost as hard as losing him. Eleanor felt tears threatening and turned back to the cookies, arranging and rearranging them needlessly. I didn't know how to be in the world without him, she admitted. We were together since I was 22. I never had to be just me. And now? Claire asked softly. Eleanor considered the question, thinking of the past weeks, the coffee shop mornings, the visits to Dr. Chen, the conversations with Zoe, the text messages to Claire, the growing comfort of finding her own rhythm. Now I'm learning, she said finally. One day at a time. Claire wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that Eleanor's breath caught. I'm proud of you, Claire whispered. And Dad would be too. They stood together in the warm kitchen, the Christmas tree lights casting a soft glow from the living room, Blessing curled in her new bed nearby, the sound of Scott's gentle snoring drifting down the stairs. For the first time in 3 years, the cottage felt truly alive again, filled with the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of family. Frank is coming for Christmas dinner, Eleanor said after a moment. I hope that's all right. Claire's smile was answer enough. Christmas Eve dawned bright and clear, the winter sun casting long shadows across the frost-covered garden. Eleanor woke early, her mind already racing with preparations for the day ahead. Scott would be up soon, his excitement for the holiday impossible to contain even in sleep. Sure enough, as she descended the stairs in her robe and slippers, she heard the patter of small feet and excited whispers from the guest room. Scott, it's too early, came Claire's muffled voice. Grandma's probably still asleep. But Blessing might be awake, Scott replied with impeccable 7-year-old logic. And Santa might have come early. Eleanor smiled, quickening her pace to the kitchen. By the time Scott appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in all directions and his dinosaur pajamas rumpled from sleep, she had hot chocolate heating on the stove and cinnamon rolls warming in the oven. Grandma, he exclaimed, rushing to hug her around the waist. Is it Christmas yet? Christmas Eve, Eleanor corrected, bending to kiss the top of his head. But that means we have lots of special things to do today. Like what? Scott's eyes widened with anticipation. Well, Eleanor said, pouring hot chocolate into a mug decorated with snowmen. We need to bake cookies for Santa and take a walk to see the neighborhood decorations and maybe read The Night Before Christmas before bed. And presents? Scott asked hopefully. Tomorrow morning? Claire said firmly, appearing in the doorway in her own robe, hair pulled into a messy bun. Coffee first, then Christmas excitement? The day unfolded in a series of small, perfect moments. Scott and Eleanor cutting out sugar cookies shaped like stars and trees, Mark taking Scott for a walk to burn off excess energy, while Claire and Eleanor prepared vegetables for the next day's dinner, an impromptu carol sing-along when Mark discovered the old piano in the den still worked. Through it all, Blessing wove her way in and out of the activities, gradually growing more comfortable with the visitors. By afternoon, she allowed Scott to gently stroke her back, and by evening, she had claimed a spot on the sofa between Eleanor and Claire as they watched a Christmas movie. "She's really something," Claire said quietly, scratching Blessing behind the ears. "I can see why you fell in love with her." Eleanor smiled, watching the cat's eyes drift closed in contentment. "She changed everything," she said simply. That night, after Scott had finally been convinced to go to bed, "But what if I miss Santa?" and the presents had been arranged under the tree, Eleanor sat alone in the living room, a single lamp casting a warm glow across the space. Blessing jumped into her lap, purring loudly. "It's been quite a day, hasn't it?" Eleanor murmured, stroking the cat's soft fur. "And tomorrow will be even busier. Frank is coming for dinner, and there will be presents and so much food." She trailed off, realizing she was talking to the cat as if she were a person. Yet it felt natural, this quiet communion with the creature who had become her constant companion. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing her face against Blessing's warm side. "For finding me, for staying, for everything." Blessing responded by kneading Eleanor's lap, claws gently pricking through the fabric of her robe, golden eyes half closed in feline bliss. Christmas morning erupted in a flurry of torn wrapping paper and exclamations of delight. Scott was beside himself with joy at the telescope Eleanor had splurged on, remembering Robert's love of stargazing and how he had taught Claire to identify constellations from this very garden. "We can look at the stars tonight," Scott declared, carefully examining each part of the instrument. "Grandma, do you know any constellations?" "A few," Eleanor said, her throat tight with emotion. "Your grandfather taught me. And your mother, too, when she was about your age." Claire met her mother's eyes across the room, a shared memory passing between them. "Orion was always Dad's favorite," she said softly. "The Hunter," Scott nodded seriously. "I know that one. It has the 3 stars in a row for his belt." "That's right," Eleanor smiled. "Your grandfather would be very impressed." The exchange was interrupted by Blessing, who had discovered the discarded wrapping paper and was pouncing on every crinkle and rustle. Scott dissolved into giggles at the cat's antics, and soon the moment of bittersweet remembrance gave way to present joy. Claire and Mark had given Eleanor a digital photo frame, preloaded with family photos both old and new. "We can add to it whenever we take new pictures," Claire explained. "And it will update automatically." Eleanor was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, a perfect blend of preserving memories while making room for new ones. For Blessing, Scott had selected a collection of toys that the cat investigated with appropriate feline disdain before settling on a simple crinkle ball as her favorite, batting it across the floor with single-minded determination. By late afternoon, the house was filled with the rich aromas of roasting turkey and baking pies. Eleanor moved through the kitchen with a confidence she hadn't felt in years, Claire working alongside her in comfortable companionship. Mark and Scott had taken Blessing's crinkle ball and created an elaborate obstacle course in the den, the cat's delighted pounces punctuated by Scott's laughter. When the doorbell rang at 5 o'clock precisely, Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves. She smoothed her hair, styled more carefully than usual, and straightened the new sweater Claire had helped her select from her closet. "I'll get it," Claire called, but Eleanor shook her head. "No, I will." She took a deep breath and opened the door to find Frank standing on the porch, a bouquet of winter flowers in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he said, his smile warming her more effectively than the fire crackling in the living room. "Merry Christmas, Frank. Please come in." The introductions went smoothly, Frank's natural charm and genuine interest in Claire's work as an environmental lawyer and Mark's passion for architectural restoration, making conversation flow easily. Scott regarded the newcomer with solemn curiosity until Frank produced the gift bag. "I understand there's a young man here who's become friends with a certain cat," he said, offering the bag to Scott. "This might help with that friendship." Inside was a hand-bound book with blank pages and a set of colored pencils. "For drawing Blessing," Frank explained, "or writing stories about her adventures, or whatever you imagine." Scott's face lit up. "Mom, look what Mr. Frank made me." "That's beautiful," Claire said, examining the craftsmanship of the binding. "Did you make this yourself?" "It's what I do," Frank said modestly. "Books have been my life's work. Giving them new bindings, restoring damaged pages, sometimes creating new ones entirely. Like you did for my mom," Claire said quietly, her gaze moving between Frank and Eleanor. The simple observation hung in the air, profound in its accuracy. Eleanor felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, joy, a touch of embarrassment at being so transparent, and beneath it all, a deep sense of rightness. Dinner was a convivial affair, the dining table that had sat empty or partially used for so long now full of faces and voices. Frank fit seamlessly into the family gathering, sharing stories that made Scott giggle and engaging Mark in a lengthy discussion about historical building techniques. Eleanor, watching from the head of the table, felt as if she were observing a scene from someone else's life, yet it was hers. This moment, these people, this feeling of connection and belonging. Ktten, blessing naturally, refused to be excluded from the festivities. Halfway through dinner, she leapt onto the empty chair beside Eleanor, sitting with such regal dignity that no one had the heart to remove her. "She knows her place in the family hierarchy," Frank observed with amusement. "Right at the Queen's right hand." "Queen?" Eleanor laughed, though the comparison pleased her more than she cared to admit. "Absolutely," Frank said, his eyes holding hers across the table. "Ruler of all she surveys, benevolent and wise?" Claire caught Eleanor's eye, her expression a mix of surprise and approval. Later, as they cleared the dishes together while the men took Scott outside to try out his telescope despite the early hour, Claire nudged her mother gently. "He's wonderful, Mom. Really wonderful." Eleanor felt herself blushing again. "He's a good friend," she said carefully. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Is that all you want him to be?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. Was that all? The comfortable companionship, the shared interests, the easy conversations, these had been enough, more than enough, after years of isolation. The idea of more had seemed impossible, inappropriate even at her age after such loss. Yet something in Claire's question opened a door in Eleanor's mind, allowing her to glimpse possibilities she had deliberately kept at bay. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I haven't thought that far ahead." Claire's smile was gentle. "Maybe it's time to start?" The evening concluded with Scott finally succumbing to exhaustion, carried upstairs by Mark while clutching his new book and mumbling about stars and cats. Claire followed soon after, leaving Eleanor and Frank alone in the living room, the Christmas tree lights casting a soft, multicolored glow across the space. "Your family is lovely," Frank said, accepting the glass of port Eleanor offered. "Scott is a remarkable boy." "He is," Eleanor agreed, settling beside Frank on the sofa. Blessing immediately claimed the space between them, stretching out with presumptuous comfort. "I don't see him nearly enough. Seattle is so far. Perhaps you could visit them," Frank suggested. "Or perhaps they'll come here more often now." "Perhaps." Eleanor sipped her port, the sweet warmth spreading through her. "Claire thinks they might come for spring break. Scott wants to see how big Blessing will be by then." Frank smiled, stroking the cat's head with gentle fingers. "He's quite taken with her, as are we all." The "we" included him so naturally, so easily, that Eleanor felt a surge of emotion too complex to name. Gratitude, certainly, joy, and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Thank you for coming today," she said quietly, "for being part of all of this." Frank's hand found hers on the sofa, his touch warm and steady. "Thank you for inviting me into your home, into your life." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Blessing purring contentedly between them, the fire crackling low in the grate, the house around them settling into the deep peace of a winter night. "Eleanor," Frank said finally, his voice gentle but serious, "may I ask you something?" She nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "Would you consider having dinner with me next week? Not just coffee, not just as friends, a proper dinner. The two of us?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound in its implications. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, at Blessing's trusting form stretched between them, at the Christmas tree lights reflecting in Frank's glasses. She thought of Robert, not with the sharp pain of loss that had been her companion for so long, but with a gentle acknowledgement of what had been and what could still be. "Yes," she said, the word coming easily, naturally. "I'd like that very much." Frank's smile, relieved, joyful, tender, was answer enough. Later, after Frank had gone home with promises to call the next day, Eleanor prepared for bed with Blessing following her usual evening routine. As she settled under the covers, the cat claimed her customary spot against Eleanor's side, purring softly in the darkness. "Well," Eleanor whispered, stroking the soft fur, "life certainly takes unexpected turns, doesn't it?" Blessing kneaded the quilt, golden eyes gleaming in the faint light from the window. 3 months ago, Eleanor had been a lonely widow moving through empty days with no purpose beyond basic survival. Now her house had been filled with family, laughter, possibilities, all because she had opened a door on a rainy night and saved a shivering kitten. Or perhaps, as seemed increasingly clear, it was the other way around. Spring arrived with a gentle persistence, coaxing crocuses from the soil in Eleanor's garden and bringing longer, warmer days. Blessing, now fully grown into her elegant adult form, spent hours on the windowsill watching birds and squirrels, her tail twitching with predatory focus. The cottage had undergone subtle transformations over the winter months. New curtains in the living room, freshly painted walls in the kitchen, bookshelves reorganized to make room for new volumes. Small changes that reflected larger ones in Eleanor's life. Her regular coffee meetings with Frank had expanded to include dinners, museum visits, even a weekend trip to a book fair in a neighboring state. Their relationship had developed with the unhurried comfort of people who understood that time was both precious and abundant at their stage of life. Claire and Mark had indeed brought Scott for spring break, the house once again filling with the boys' boundless energy and Blessing's playful responses. Scott had filled nearly half his special book with drawings and stories about Blessing's secret adventures, each one more elaborate than the last. On this particular April morning, Eleanor stood in her garden, pruning shears in hand, surveying the beds that had been neglected for too long. Frank would be coming over later to help plant the rose bushes he had helped her select, replacements for those that Robert had tended so carefully and that Eleanor had allowed to wither after his death. Blessing appeared at her side, investigating a fallen leaf with serious intent, before looking up at Eleanor with what seemed remarkably like approval. "Yes, it's time," Eleanor said, answering the unasked question in those golden eyes. Time to bring the garden back to life. As she knelt in the soft earth, digging spaces for new growth, Eleanor felt a sense of completion, not of ending, but of cycle. Grief had shaped her, changed her, nearly consumed her, but it had not, in the end, defined her. Love had done that. Love lost and found and transformed. Love for Robert that would always be part of her. Love for Claire and Scott that had sustained her even in her darkest isolation. Love for Frank that had appeared so unexpectedly in her life's autumn. And love for the small creature who had come to her door on a rainy night, asking for shelter and offering salvation in return. Blessing rubbed against Eleanor's leg, purring loudly, then settled on a sunny patch of newly turned soil, her eyes half closed in contentment. A lonely widow had saved a stray kitten, never knowing it would one day rescue her right back. The thought no longer brought tears, but a deep, abiding gratitude for second chances, for unexpected blessings, for the remarkable resilience of the heart. Eleanor returned to her gardening, humming softly as she worked, her hands in the soil, her face turned toward the sun, while beside her, Blessing kept peaceful vigil, companion, guardian, and guide on the continuing journey ahead.